All right. So we're looking at an assumption question, and we've seen that assumption questions generally tend to confuse a lot of us. Also, I would like to add here that if you are able to identify the assumption well, then a lot of questions are put in place. See, the assumption is that unstated premise which supports the conclusion. Okay? And identifying the assumption would help you to weaken an argument, because an assumption when not true weakens the argument. An assumption when true strengthens it. So a strengthening question can be worked with. A weakening question can be worked with. Okay. Evaluate question can be worked with. A flaw can be in argument. That question is simplified if you are able to identify the assumption. The whole analysis of an argument, evaluation of an argument is very much dependent on the identification of the right assumption. We know that you have the skill to evaluate an argument if you're identifying the correct assumption. And therefore, important, of course, to get the right assumption. Let us get to the assumption question. We have one here. So as I always say, read the question first. So when you start reading the argument, you know exactly what to look for. We're reading this together, and of course, identifying the premises and what conclusion is drawn from the premises, all of that. Let's start. Make a note of some premises also, so we can refer back to them when we are looking for an answer to our question. Networks of blood vessels in bat wings serve only to disperse heat generated in flight. Okay. So here we have the first premise telling us that blood vessels in bats only serve the purpose of dispersing heat. Next, he says, heat is generated only because bats flap their wings. Okay, so flapping heat is caused by flapping, or flapping causes heat. Next, we've come to some discovery. So I'm sure this is going to lead us to our conclusion or a hypothesis, as I can already see here. Thus, paleontologists' recent discovery that the winged dinosaur, Syndactylus, had similar networks of blood vessels in the skin of its wings provides evidence, which means here we have a next premise. The evidence here is provided in the first half of the sentence as it continues for the hypothesis. The hypothesis or the conclusion follows. What is that premise? We found that the winged dinosaurs and Syndactylus had similar networks of blood vessels. So this is what is being said here. Okay, the winged dino has a network of blood vessels, and maybe we can put here a because. So because it's your evidence, because the dino has blood vessels, he says, therefore, and the hypothesis that the Syndactylus flew by flapping and not by gliding. Okay, not important. Flew by flapping should be sufficient for us. The argument in the passage relies on which of the following assumptions? Okay, let's see the answers one by one. But before that, as we have been telling you always, try and predict an answer. Okay, so let's do that. Let's come up with the assumptions. Okay. We are told that existence of blood vessels, or the purpose, not existence, the purpose the purpose of blood vessels is to disperse heat. Okay, the only purpose of blood vessels is to disperse heat. Of course, in bats, you've specified. Okay. Heat is generated only because of flapping. Okay. But I would like to here caution you. Okay. Be wary that we're telling you that blood vessels have just one purpose in bats. Okay. It does not mean that heat cannot be dispersed differently or through other means. Okay. So if I could take you back to a proposition, Aristotelian proposition, where we said all x's are y's, a premise, and we saw what valid conclusions we can draw from there. If you are given that all x's are y's, it does not logically suggest that all y's are x's. The only inference that you can draw would be that all y's may be x's. Maybe, yes, there is no other way to disperse heat than through blood vessels. Okay, but there could be other ways of dispersing heat, and again, the same thing for the second sentence too. Okay, so the first assumption that strikes to us is it is being assumed that what is true for bats is true for dinosaurs, right? That is the assumption which immediately comes to your head. Okay. Yes, true. Okay. Let's delve into it a little more. Okay. If on what grounds have we hypothesized that the Syndactylus flew by flapping? Because we found them to have similar networks of blood vessels. Okay. But if these blood vessels were serving some other purpose in this dinosaur, not the same as in bats, then my argument is weakened, which means the assumption is that what is true for blood vessels and their purpose among bats is true for even for dinos. Okay. If a Syndactylus has blood vessels, but they are of no use, okay, or they perform some other function, okay, they do not even do what blood vessels in bats' wings do, then again the argument is weakened, which means the assumption is that the only function of these blood vessels or the function of these blood vessels in dinosaurs has to be the one as in bats. Okay? And that should help you. Or other ways, there is no heat generated in flapping. Okay? I'm trying to weaken. We've often told you that try to weaken your argument and you will know the underlying assumptions. That is the whole reason one strategy that we adopt for assumption questions is the denial test. You negate the assumption. The assumption when negated must weaken my conclusion. If it does not do anything to my conclusion, then it is not the right answer. So let's get to the answer choices. A says, Syndactylus would not have had blood vessels, networks of blood vessels in the skin of its wings, if these networks were of no use to the dinosaur, to the Syndactylus. Okay? This is precisely what we assumed, okay? Our predicted answer, our shadow answer. Okay? And we'll negate it too. So A is the correct answer. Okay? But we'll look at the other choices as we go. Syndactylus would not have had networks of blood vessels if these networks were of no use. Let's negate it. If the dinosaur, okay, so let's change this would to, let's say, could. And of course, the not goes away. Okay, so let's delete that. And we're saying that the dinosaur could have had networks of blood vessels, okay, even if these networks were of no use. Okay, if that is true, the argument which is based on the presence of blood vessels, okay, the hypothesis that they flapped because of the presence of blood vessels would definitely fall apart. It would be weakened, a conclusion. Therefore, this becomes the right answer. Let's see what B says. All creatures that fly by flapping their wings have networks of blood vessels in the skin of their wings. Okay. We have only hypothesized and concluded about the dinosaur. Okay. That does not necessarily require all creatures that fly by flapping to have blood vessels. Please understand. Okay. Flapping, I would like to bring here to your notice what we just said about if all x's are y's, it doesn't mean all y's are x's. Okay. We have told you that, or here, we have actually written it down here, so that should be simpler. We have said the only function of blood vessels is to disperse heat. Okay, so there's a spelling mistake here, typo error. So blood vessels have only one purpose. Okay, but heat could be dispersed through some other means in other creatures. Next, we're saying that heat is generated only when there is flapping. Okay, but flapping can even cause other, I don't know, outcomes. Not generating heat, something else. Flapping may even cause, I don't know, dispersal of wind or something else could be happening. Okay, so it is not necessary that, yes, heat is generated only when flapping happens, but flapping can happen even without it. So that makes B incorrect. More than one grounds on which you can eliminate B. C says winged dinosaurs that flap their wings in flight could have been able to fly more effectively than winged dinosaurs that could only glide. Okay, this is irrelevant. A comparison between what would be more effective certainly does not do anything to our conclusion, so it cannot be an assumption. D says if Syndactylus flew by flapping its wings, then paleontologists would certainly be able to find some evidence that it did so. Okay. Well, the evidence used here is the existence of blood vessels. Okay. The presence of another one would help, okay, or would have been found is of no relevance. So again, D cannot be the correct answer. E has confused a lot of us. It has been a commonly picked incorrect answer. Okay, and we'll tell you why it would not be E. And of course, we've explained why it's E. Heat generated by Syndactylus in flapping its wings in flight could not have been dispersed by anything other than blood vessels in its wings. Okay, this is the same thing again. Okay? We already mentioned the premise says that heat is only generated through flapping. Okay, heat is only generated when there is flapping. Okay, but flapping can happen and flapping can cause other outcomes too, as we said. All right. Now, when would E be the correct assumption? Okay. E would have been the correct assumption if the hypothesis would have been, or rather, the evidence would have been that of flapping. So if we found dinosaurs flapping their wings and therefore said that they have blood vessels, okay, then yes, it would mean that heat is generated. Okay. The only function of blood vessels is to generate heat. The only outcome of flapping is generation of heat. And since we have found flapping, we go back 2, therefore blood vessels. Look at our conclusion and the premise 2, the evidence. He says, we found them with blood vessels, therefore they are flapping. Okay. E would have been a correct answer if we said we found the syndactylus flapping, therefore it must have had blood vessels. That's not what we are saying. We're saying blood vessels, therefore flapping, not flapping, therefore blood vessels. Okay. Had that been the case, this would have been E would have been the right answer, not otherwise, would have been the assumption and therefore the right answer, not otherwise. Okay. So A is the correct answer. Okay. It is a nice question and hope we have got that.